happy to have you here with me to get to interesting answers for certain questions and basically having the opportunity to share your time with me. I feel really honored about that, so thank you so much. So, what I am about to talk with you about is, actually, I guess my title already gives it away a little bit. It's on who are you? It's on authentication, which is the way on how we get to those answers, right? Well, let's start with the facts that authentication is something you probably already encountered. May it be in your professional life when developing applications, but also in your daily life, I guess, because answering the questions who you are is something you need to do on a certain occasion. Even today, I do think you needed to enter this conference with a ticket, right? So you needed to prove that you are who you are, because it's assigned to your name, getting your badge, which we all wear around our neck, actually. So yeah, you needed to answer this question, who you are. And there are many points, many occasions I find this question. And a particular cute one was in basically this small video. It's a small short film. I guess it's around, not even 15 minutes long, short film called Who Are You? It was directed in 2019 by Julio Pot. And it's pretty cute because it deals with a protagonist who tries to answer these questions. He wants to answer the question for himself, of course, but he's like basically encountering a delivery girl and asking her for a cup of coffee. And they talk about this question, who she is, who they are, and who we are as the viewer, actually. And to quote the film, many questions without answers. And this is something which shouldn't happen when it comes to us as a developer. So who are you? Who are Vue? And of course, I guess everyone knows what Vue is or who Vue are, because it's our beloved JavaScript framework. And of course, I love puns. I love bad puns specifically, and this is a bad pun. Who are Vue? Who are you? I hope I will never mix that up. For example, when talking to a Vue, that would be really embarrassing or cringy. So hopefully not. Let's get to the question, who are you? There are lots of cases, especially in web development, where you need to have an exact answer on that. It needs to be valid, it needs to be sure, and it needs to be secure. You need to know who your user is before granting them access to your application. May it be the information stored in it. May it be features you want to have as a paid feature. Stuff like that. And authentication is the thing we need to get these answers from our users. Well, let's start with a basically common ground, common definition, so we are at the same page when it comes to what authentication actually is. If I look it up in the Oxford Dictionary in general, they say it's the process or action of proving or showing something to be true, genuine, or valid. And if we refer that to software engineering, Oxford says it's the process or action of verifying the identity of a user or process. So you can be confident that the user who wants to log into your application is the one you think it is. And when it comes to taking a look at on how to build authentication inside of a VueJS application, I will try to be mindful of your time, and I will focus on the most key aspects. There will be a deep dive a little later on in NGD, unfortunately, by my dear colleague Elisa, who will get into more depth. But now I will focus on the most key aspects. But don't worry, I will try to always mention more further resources by a QR code. So it will often show up in the upper right corner. But if you're not fast enough to scan it, no worries, I will share my slides later on. OK, most important parts. What is the most important part, in my opinion? And I will start with some terms. I'll be quick, no worries. Because there are two terms many people, including myself, I am guilty, I'm sorry, are mixing it up at some points. So, authentication versus authorization. It's not the same thing. That's really important to know. Authentication is, as we defined before, the way of verifying who a user is and validating their identity before giving access or granting access. On the other hand, authorization is on the user permissions. So this user, is he allowed to do certain things? Doing CRUD operations, reading data, accessing a feature, so everything they are allowed or permitted to do. It's a more granular process you, for example, can do with OpenFGA, but I digress. Even if it's not the same, it's still interconnected, right? Because before you decide what a user is able to do or are permitted to do, you need to know who he is or who she is or who they are. So in other words, authentication is the first step to make authorization decisions. OK, with that being clear, how could an authentication process look like? Well, I will scribble a really traditional simplified one. Picture this. We have a web app with pages generated on a server, server-side rendered, for example, by a backend, by PHP, and the server sends fully generated pages back to the browser. And in this scenario, our user will visit a website on the browser, which means that the website will request something, some page, from the server. And the server handles all the logic. If this logic, or if this web page is protected, the user will enter some credentials. Maybe a username, maybe a password, maybe something else, we'll get to that. And the browser will send them to the server. The server will check those credentials, oftentimes with a database where a whole load of credentials are being stored in, encrypted most of the time, and see if they match. I hope they're encrypted. Afterwards, it will decide if they match, of course, and if they indeed match, it's a correct user who's basically permitted to access the page. The server will send back the page they demanded, but not only the page, but also a cookie, a session to keep the login active. So the user doesn't need to log in again and again and again and again. And later, if the session's still valid, they are able to log in again. OK, this is pretty easy. I guess most of people figured that out. But how can we build such a thing? How can we build authentication? Before we decide on a small demo, for example, we could tackle together some coding. We first need to decide what type of authentication we would like to have, like the factors. And there are 3 to choose from. First, a factor we all know. This could be a username, this could be a password, something inside of our head, like the typical code word in some novels or something you could imagine. But this is not all we can use for authenticating ourselves, like proving who we are. We could go for something we have. This could be our cell phone with a typical authenticator app. It could be a debit card. It could be a YubiKey, a security key, something we are processing, and another person does not as a result. And last but not least, something we are. Like all biometrics, for example, your fingerprints, you could basically give to a sensor, or Face ID if you're using Apple or the Android pendant. If I think about a typical demo to write in 30 minutes, but I would go for an easy one. Like the typical Authn login, typical login UI, trying to catch username and password, validating it like we pictured before in this simplified workflow. So in this case, it's something we know. It's just one of the 3 factors. So we will call it single-factor authentication. And let's now finally get into some code and build a simplified way of authenticating, a traditional one. So I built a small project based on Vue 3, and I only use Vue route, so a router as a second dependency. There will be a third one. We'll get to that, because I don't want to stick only for traditional authentication, because that will be boring. You will need some backend. For this talk, I will mock it, just for the sake of time and clarity, actually. It's a simple Express server. And, of course, a login UI. We will have a home page as a starting point, a login form where we can enter our credentials, and a dashboard, which should be protected, so we shouldn't be able to reach this dashboard without being logged in. And if you're curious to see what I built, and hopefully be nice to it, or if you have negative feedback, I love negative feedback, you will find a StackBlitz instance under ramona.dev, or in this QR code. I don't know if it's working on any mobile phone, though, so maybe if you have a laptop, it's better to use it. And a GitHub repo, if you want to play around with my upcoming demo. OK, some small words on the structure. It's pretty typical Vue 3 project. So we have a views part where all of our aforementioned UI parts are located in. The home view, the login view with the login form, and the dashboard. I will use router.js for the view router. So we have a possibility to protect the dashboard route, and a backend mock in the root level, so the server.js file. And I want to take a look at this backend mock first and what it's doing. So here you see, it's a pretty boring, simple mock, actually. So it's a standard Express server with a login root, and in it you will find 3 parts which are interesting. First, I will hardcode a user for this demo. So we don't have a database of a kind here. For a longer talk or next talk, I will include a database, but for now, I will just hardcode one user inside of an array, so pretty basic. Second, we will get the user from the client, basically which was sent by the client, and we try to find it inside of our database mock. And last but not least, depending if a user is available, so if we can find a correct user matching these credentials sent by the client, we will send a successful or false response with the corresponding status code. A small look on my root.js, just to see how to protect those roots. There you go. We are protecting the dashboard root by setting requires of to be true in the meter of the roots. OK. So let's see how I will build that up. I will start with a small reminder on how to protect the root inside of the router.js, so requires auth.true. And afterwards, I will go to the login view. And in it, I will get the credentials the user entered in the form by using a view model. So pretty basic. There we go with the password. And then we would love to use those credentials to post them to our backend mock by using Axios. I do it in the try-catch error, so if something goes wrong, it's easier for me to debug. And in it, finally, we will send the request, or basically we will post the request, because it's a post 1. So let's await it. I'll send it to our root, this basically localhost, so I try to keep it simple. There I will add some headers which we need, for example, content type, which is a JSON, because it would be a JSON. Application JSON, there we go. And then add the data as a body. I will take a look at the response, and if there is one, I will get looking failed to true. It's just a little mark for like styling, and then navigating to the dashboard by router push, so basic view router way. And else, if the credentials are invalid, I do some error handling by this little flag and do a small console error. Same inside of the catch later on, so if something else goes wrong, we will get notified. There we go. Just changing the error message a little bit. And then let's test it out if the things I wrote down are actually working. So at first, let's see if I can access the dashboard without being logged in. I cannot. Woohoo, that's wonderful. I will test some invalid credentials, and then I will test credentials. You can see the console for the error message. Invalid. I'm not being able to log in. And with valid credentials, it should work out. And a small note. if you paid some attention, there's indeed a small typo inside of this little coding example. If you paid attention and found it, please come to me at the booth and get some swag as a reward because, yeah, I am a weird person doing typos. OK. Well, now you might wonder, why is she telling us that? Because it's too easy, it's too basic, that's traditional authentication. Who's doing that? Well, there's some things to add. I want to introduce a small standard for you. I will keep it short because I don't want to take away every content of Elisa's talk later on. But it's on one standard I guess most of you already heard about. It's on Authn. It's an industry standard protocol for authorization, access delegation, but you can use it for authentication as well. Remember, it's the first step to do authorization decisions later on. So basically, it's the way to grant access to information on websites without giving them the passwords. So no sending passwords back and forth, which is pretty good because it's a little more secure, right? But if we don't use passwords, what else are we using then? Well, in Authn, I guess 2.1 is the most recent version. We are using a token-based approach. OK, you introduced tokens, right? What's up with tokens? Well, a token is basically something which doesn't have meaning on its own, but if you fill it with content, if you fill it with claims, it will contain all the information you might need. You can compare it like a stamped ticket, and it allows you to remain access as long as the token or ticket is valid. Think about it like that. In Germany, we have bus or train tickets, which are fine the way they are, but you need to stamp them in order for them to be valid. If you don't stamp them, you might have a problem with some control officers inside of the train. So please think about that. Or like, you needed to swap your entrance ticket here to the badge you're wearing, right? So you could consider it a token. Well, a token allows a user to verify their identity with it, and in return, they receive a unique access ID token or refresh token. What are those three tokens, you might ask? The ID token is interesting because it encodes all the user's authentication information. And this could basically anything what you want the client to know about your user. Might be an ID, might be a role. A role might be interesting for authorization later on. And it's meant to be read by the client. So for your Vue application, you will mostly interact with an ID token. The access token is something else. It's meant for the server and should be read by the server. It's meant to allow an application to access an API. And then you can receive an access token after a user is successfully authenticated via API, and you can pass this access token as a credential when you call the target API. So like an ID token, but for the API. It's interesting to know that tokens format, it's not specified. We'll get to that later on. And last but not least, the third one, the refresh token. We don't want our token to be valid forever, because in this regard, you could use it forever, which is pretty insecure. Think about it like an ever-stamped train ticket. I guess Deutsche Bahn wouldn't like that. You can use a refresh token to get a new access token and to renew your session and still being secure enough, and nobody can basically work with your old token then anymore because it's invalidated. I mentioned before that it's important that, it's the case that a format of a token is not specified. But at Authn, for example, we are using one standard, which you might stumble across to at some point. It's a token in the JSON format, basically. In detail, it's called JWT or JWT token, and this is a shorthand for JSON Web Token. This is an open standard, so you can take a look at it. And it's compact and self-contained for securely transmitting information in between parties, encoded as a JSON object, which makes it easy to basically store information in it. You can sign this token, which is the stamp basically, which makes it secure because you can be sure on the sender of the token, and you can ensure that nobody messed around with your token before you received it, which is pretty cool, isn't it? So yes, you can sign it. And basically, all the information that matters for your application is contained inside the payload, no matter if it's like for the API, being the access token or the ID token. A JWT token can look like this. So it's made of 3 parts. Again, I guess we have many things made out of 3. Rule of 3, I love it. Here you can see, actually, it's a screenshot of jwt.io, which is a website we have for helping you validate and debug tokens. And here you see, like there, the first part being the header, containing some metadata, like the type or the algorithm used for signing your token. The payload, as said, this is the point where the information is stored, at least when it comes to an ID token. It has all the claims. Like this is how the information stored in it is called. And those are like key value pairs, giving it its meaning. May it be user ID, may it be role, we'll use it later on. And last but not least, the signature. So how to being verified and signed with a private key, for example. OK, so how can we include JWT token into our VueJS application to build a token-based authentication, right? Well, let's take a look at our server mock again. I will import the JSON Web Token library. It's open source. That's wonderful. You can import it. Then I will define a super secret key. So it's really secret. You can, of course, use a secret key here. And I will keep it not completely decrypted for the sake to see what happens here. But of course, you should think about a private key and probably encrypt it. Then we will create the token by using the sign method and include all the information you would like to have it in it. May it be the user ID, may it be the role, whatever you need for your client to, for example, decide which menu item to collapse or basically do authorization decisions later on. We will include the secret key to sign it, and then some options like when the token should expire. Yeah. And then we can basically send it as a JSON to our client again, and then react to it accordingly. There we go. We go to the point where we were before. We will react to the token if it's there, if it's included inside of the response. For now, I will save it to the local storage. Wait on that one. So I'll set the item so we can access this later on when we will test our small demo. And then again, doing some setting a flag to login failed to false because we were able to log in and then navigate to the dashboard again. Yeah, let's test it out. We go to login. We will use invalid credentials again. Open the console to see what's happening. It will fail. Wonderful. We don't want to have unauthorized user accessing. And if we use valid ones, we are able to log in. Let's copy the token we got and paste it onto jwt.io to see if it's valid. There we go. Let's add it. And there we can see the information we added to the token some minutes ago, or seconds actually. And it's working out. Yay, we were able to build a simplified token-based authentication in Vue.js without the inclusion of too many libraries besides JSON Web Token. And a little hint, if you want to use a proper backend like Auth0, you could add those custom claims inside of an Auth0 action. It's pretty easy. Well, did you notice the small careful warning inside of my commands? Because when I was asking at a non-conference where people usually store their tokens, I got pretty split answers. It was almost 50-50 in between local storage and cookies. Well, due to the time frame, and we are talking about VueJS being a single-page application, I went for local storage. Because it might get a little difficult to decrypt cookies when it comes to using SPAs. And the tokens will be invalidated. So it's not too dangerous to use local storage, but of course, the contra points, the cons, are still valid. Like, you need to be careful when it comes to storing any information inside of your local storage, right? Especially if it's sensitive information. So be careful when it comes to that, and be aware that cross-site scripting protection is not that effective in local storage. So it's easy for attackers to run their JavaScript on the same origin, leading it to be easy to retrieve secrets. Well, I will still add a small hint on how to use HTTP-only cookies. I will scrap the decrypt topic for now, just for the time frame and to be mindful with your time. But I just wanted to mention it anyway. So let's take a look at the server mock again. And here you can see, at first, like a small change, I added a configuration for CORS to prevent CORS errors, because otherwise this mock will not work, and we all love CORS errors, so let's get rid of them right now. And the other part, after we were creating our JWT token, I added a set cookie header with the token and the addition of HTTP only. And if you do it like that, your client will set this cookie automatically, which is pretty easy, right? But it's still open to decrypt it properly, so please keep that in mind when it comes to this example. OK, I hope it came across that authentication, even if you build it on your own, is not that scary. And I don't want to be arrogant. I will not discourage you to build your own, because you will have your reasons. I don't want to contradict myself on that stage. However, you might have reasons not to build authentication completely on your own. May it be the burden of maintenance. You don't want to keep it up to date. You don't want to keep track of other security issues maybe popping up in Vue or in other libraries. Or you want to just merely focus on the things you want to do best and not on those like boring tasks like authentication. Or what's actually, in my opinion, the most important point, you don't want to build other ways of authentication. Maybe multi-factor authentication, where you use 2 or even all 3 factors or authentication types. Be it passkeys, be it, basically a YubiKey. And I start with passkeys. It's a really good feature I didn't want to build on my own, like all the things Authn will tell you. Or just normal passwordless, may it be an OTP or a link to login. So if you don't want to build all of those things, you could take a look at lots of libraries. I went for 3 for now, but there are plenty more. And if you have your favorite library, please talk to me and let's take a look at it together. Could be a Vue Authn, which is basically a well-known package to have Vue authentication. If you're using Nuxt, there's Nuxt to use. Or, of course, honorable mention, at Authn we have a Vue SDK too, which is pretty easy to use to get all those features into your application, including passkeys. OK, let's be mindful of your time. If I want you to remember 4 things of my talk, it's those. No matter how you build authentication, please keep in mind that it's really important to secure the data of your users or your own features or whatever you want to protect. It's really important, and you should treat it responsibly. Authentication is not the same as authorization, even though they're connected. So the one is like verifying the user is who they say they are, and the other one is the permission, what they are able to do or permitted to do. There are 3 factors for authentication to remember: something we know, something we have, and something we are. And you can implement it on your own. It's not that scary, but don't feel bad if you want to use libraries or tools to basically support you. That's totally fine too. So no matter if your authentication is custom built or like introduced by a library, you need to know who your user is. In the short movie, Who Are You, I mentioned before, they actually leave the question up to the viewer who the person in the story are, or who the user is, basically, the viewer. In an app, it's up to us developers as well to determine it. And the good thing is, we are able to answer the questions who our users are or who we are, no matter if we are a developer or user, in a secure way, in a confident way, and in a short way. And there's only one question left. Who am I? I'm the illustration girl. Well, looks outside. My name is Ramona Schwering. I'm the developer advocate at Authn. You can find me in this booth, like this direction there. And there's nothing else left than to just thank you for your time. If you want to go into that, visit me at the booth, or take a look at Elisa's talk in NGDE if you have tickets for both conferences. It's on authentication in a more deeper way. And apart from that, thank you so much for your time. I'm happy to have you with me. Thank you.